Which Pokemon do you choose? Come make a Pikachu, Squirtle, Bulbasaur, Pokeball, and Charmander with me. This is a beginner set, and we're going to get started by mixing all of the colors. Because there are so many colors, you want to just use a little bit at a time. A little bit goes a long way with mixing these colors, but this is a beginner set, so all of the royal icing that's included here, all of the colors that we're mixing, we're getting to a hybrid icing consistency. What that means is we're looking for like a 15 to 20 second flow. So when I run my spatula through it, it takes 15 to 20 seconds to come back together again. So this first one obviously is white, pretty straightforward to see. And to get it to the right consistency, particularly with the white where I'm not adding any extra food coloring, I'm adding a little bit of water at a time. Some people like to have a spray bottle for this, so you're not adding too much, because you can very easily add too much water and make it too thin. I use a little teaspoon, then I just add a variation of it. So for all of these colors, we're also going to be using the primary colors to get to the right color, except for black, which I use a black food coloring for, but we use gel food coloring, so yellow for Pikachu. And it was a little hard. Usually I don't need my yellow to be too specific, but Pikachu's a pretty rich yellow, a pretty deep, rich yellow, without getting into like mustard territory. And so this is probably the most yellow food coloring I've ever added to something. And I will say what you see on the screen is slightly different from what I was seeing in person. And you can tell that if you look at the beginning of this video, the yellow that I end up with is just a little bit more rich without looking kind of neon. This looks a little neon, right? And I definitely speed up the mixing point because you could watch me mix all day. There's a lot of colors in this set, so you are going to watch me mix all day. And that is why I speed it up. And we're always looking to get to that 15-20 second icing where your spatula can run through it really, really easily. And you can see I'm just adding a little bit of water at a time. You'll really start to get the hang of this the more colors you mix. Honestly, do this one set and you will get a hang of what this 15 to 20 second consistency is. Another way it's been shared with me is that it kind of runs like an Elmer's glue off your spatula. And so you can lift up a whole bunch at a time and see how it runs off the spatula. But the real true way of seeing if you have the right consistency is running your spatula through it or running a knife through it and seeing how long it takes to settle back down to an even color. The other thing I do when I'm mixing colors is I typically start with the lightest color and then go to the darkest color. So I'd start with white, I'd end with black, so I can do what's called a one bowl mixing method. It really takes two bowls if we're being honest, because I have another bowl that has my fresh white icing that hasn't been mixed to the right consistency, doesn't have color in it. Although I will have a little asterisk on doesn't have color in it because I add white food coloring to all of my royal icing. All of this color has white food coloring in it already because I just like the fresh white it gives. And I find that having that white food coloring in helps my red and my black not bleed into each other, which I will definitely talk about later because I've gotten a little too cocky and I had my black bleed into my icing. It's a whole thing. So you add in your color. You can see I'm going with red. And the trick to some of these richer colors, red and black, especially being them, is you don't want to get to the true color. We want to get to essentially the red it will develop to right here. As soon as I start adding more red food coloring to it and it doesn't change color, I don't want to add any more because particularly with these dark colors, with these rich colors, they will develop over time. And I have found with red and black, now, again, I've gotten a little cocky here, so time will tell if this will reign true. But I found with red and black, I can get them to essentially a point where they're not changing color when I'm adding food coloring, and I can immediately decorate. You'll see a lot of cookiers who wait even overnight to see how their color develops. I don't have the patience. Also, I'm not a professional, so I'm just not going to do that. I will mix my colors, I will bag them, I will immediately decorate, and I find that they dry to the right shade that I'm looking for. Anywho, back to the one bowl method. That's what I really got started on here. Is I actually forgot to do orange and red, and then I was like, shoot, I did all the colors except black. I need to go back and do orange and red because this set has so many colors. I think it has 7 or 8. Let's see, we got white, we have yellow, we have orange, we have red, we have 2 shades of green. That brings us to 6. And we have blue, which brings us to 7. And I don't think I said black, and so black brings us to 8. If I already said black, then we're at 7. But I'm pretty sure we're at 8. And I really try and keep like 4 colors or less because personally, I hate mixing colors. And I'm not gonna lie, I hate doing voiceovers on these color mixing because it's just so annoying. Anywho, the green. I'm glad I came back to it. Save a little bit of that light green that you made. You're kind of going for like a minty green for that light, and save a little bit to make darker. So adding a little bit more yellow, a little bit more blue, because Bulbasaur has these darker spots on his head and you really don't need a lot. So we just are doing a teeny bit as much as you can because it's hard to decide how much of one color you need, but we're just going to take a teeny bit of that green and make it dark green. And so because I knew I was going to reserve some of this lighter green to turn into a dark green, I made sure to add a little bit of more of that icing than I did for like the yellow or the orange. Going back to the one bowl method, you can see I cleaned my bowl because I forgot what point I was in my mixing when I had to go back and clean my bowl. I think I finally went, I don't know where I was at. Let me just say that. But you can do this one bowl method by going through all your colors. So for me, the one bowl method would work best if I did them in literally the order I've shown: white, yellow, orange, red, light green, dark green, and then get into blue and then do black. But I did rinse out my bowl in between. And when you're doing such small amounts and you're bagging your icing after every single time, it's pretty easy just to rinse it out because you don't need to do a full wash. You can add water to this, and it's fine if there's a little water left in the bowl because what are we doing? We're adding water to get to our right consistency anyways. So it really doesn't matter. And just reiterating again, you can see I didn't wash out the bowl after I did the red because I forgot it. And then I was like, let's go to the black. And it doesn't matter if there's red in it because the black's going to overdo it. This is where I did myself in. I added way too much black food coloring. And I can tell that because this is a pretty dark, rich black. And it comes back to bite me. You just want to get to a dark gray. I added way too much black food coloring. And frankly, I'm lucky it didn't turn out worse for me because I have oversaturated colors before, and that's when you've added too much of a gel food coloring and my icing wouldn't dry. I've had that happen a handful of times. It's miserable. There's all 8 of our colors, and next we're going to cut the ends of our piping bags, and I would recommend getting started with just the blue, red, white, and black. And there's a reason for this, and I'll show you right afterwards, because we are going to do some icing transfers for this. So you're going to cut the end, and then you're going to turn it 90 degrees and hope that your camera focuses on it, and then cut it again so we can have a pretty perfect circle. And then you always test it out. And if it's not flowing right, you want to kind of trim it a little bit more. But we are doing different eyes for our Squirtle, Charmander, and Bulbasaur. They all have kind of 3 different eye shapes and colors added, and you're going to go in with your black first on parchment paper. I drew with an edible pen all of these designs, and you'll find them in the free guide, how you can trace these designs onto parchment paper. I do recommend a white parchment paper over a brown. Brown's just the only one I had. And you're going to start with the black and outline every single eye shape. And so I decided I was doing 3 of each of these characters, and I decided I was going to do 4 eyes for each. So if I really screwed up a set of eyes or 2 eyes, I still had some to spare. So I do recommend doing some extras with these transfers, and we're doing them first because we need them to dry in order to put onto our cookies. And so you could do these completely a day ahead, or you could do them before you mix the rest of your colors, and then by the time you finish your colors and you decorate your cookies, these eyes will be done. So after you outline, I went through and I added the inside line. So I outlined all of the eyes, and then I'm going back with the black and doing the inside details, which I drew here. And again, this is going to be in that free guide available to you with the transfers and show you what color needs to go where, because the 3 eyes are all slightly different, and that's okay. All the characters should be a little bit different. And so you're going to go through with the black, and it can be a good idea to have 2 different blacks. This is actually what I did. And if I could go back and change this, I would make this piping bag, I would cut the tip a little bit smaller. So you can see I just finished one of these sets of the eyes. I believe these are Charmander's eyes. And so they're slightly different shape, and I'm just outlining those inside parts. My piping bag got away from me there. So I have all those different pieces. And the key to getting really good lines here is to just go slow, letting the icing fall out of your piping bag and not trying to manipulate it to fall out of your piping bag a certain way. How the icing falls is kind of just how the icing falls, and you learn to work with it. So you're going to outline all 3 of the different eye shapes and then come back in and add in the detail lines. And then once you're done with that, you're going to come back and fill in with the actual colors. So there's this there's this black section in the middle. I think I had to stop and look at my reference picture because I'm like, wait, what am I doing here? And I go and add that in. And I'm just using my piping bag to kind of move the icing around where I want it. And then I'm going to immediately come in with my other colors. So that's red. There's a little drop of red in the inner corners for these eyes. These are my Squirtle eyes. And I'm going to use my scribe to kind of get that into the different areas I want it. While I was doing this, I felt like everything was too separated and the eyes weren't going to look cohesive. You really can't see that well here. And you can also see the rest of these Squirtle eyes. I did not make that black line for the little red section in the bottom. I actually just decided I could just add a red dot and it would look fine. And then I'm coming in with the white, and I'm doing my best kind of to not touch the tip of my piping bag to the black sections. And I'm going to come back with my scribe and just move that icing around where I want it to be so that the whole eye is filled in. But I added the icing and I just thought it was like a little too separated and standing out from one another. But when they dried, I was actually incredibly happy with how they looked. I felt like it gave the eyes a lot of character, and you could immediately tell these were, anime eyes, essentially. So just use your scribe, make sure if it touches any of the black or the red to wipe it off, and then you can shake your piece of parchment in order to kind of even everything out. So you can see I finished those 4 eyes above, and now I'm working on the Bulbasaur, which unfortunately I didn't record doing the outlines or anything for. So I couldn't have shown you that, but we have the fill-in. They have this red too. The red on the Bulbasaur eye is much more prominent than on the Squirtle eye, so I decided to pipe that outline in black. And you can tell they're also much more triangular. Well, they're an equilateral triangle. Is that the word I'm looking for here? And I wanted to be careful with this white, so I'm turning the parchment paper so I can kind of get into the right spot for the white for both of these outer corners of the eyes. And you might find that you don't need to come in with your scribe to even everything out. I didn't do a lot in moving the icing around, just like a little bit of push here, and this is we're getting into the detail work. This is where I would really like a finer scribe. I literally have thought that like 2 other times in my life, and I will eventually break down and get a finer scribe. But not this day. This day I'm still using the same scribe I've been using since 2019. And then shaking. The shaking's not going to disturb the other transfers that you worked on. And lastly, we have the Charmander eyes. These are different because they have blue instead of red on them, because Charmander is orange. So it just stands out a little bit, and it's almost the full bottom of the eye. So more blue than the reds we've used previously. And then you're going to come in with the white and do, the top sections of these eyes. And you just repeat this for every single one of those specific character eyes. And these eyes are going to dry a lot faster than your cookies will, because they're not fighting with any drying from the cookie. So when you put icing on the cookie, your cookie has a lot of butter, has a lot of moisture in it. So drying the icing out, it's fighting the moisture of the cookie. For the eyes, it's not going to be the case. I think I came back to these maybe 2 or 3 hours later, and the eyes were already done, where I could literally peel them off. I tried using my scribe to kind of push them off, and I do a little bit, but I find a lot of times they were just kind of falling directly off the icing. So I'm just making sure that I can get all of them off. They're not squishy to the touch. If they squish under your fingers, let them keep drying so that these are ready to go for when we decorate our cookies. So these are all set, and we can get into it. We're going to start with the Pokeball, and what I recommend for this are 2 different circles. I am using the cover for a piping bag tip that I happened to find that I felt like was the right size for the center circle, which should be, I don't know, roughly a little bit bigger than a quarter, I think. And then the inner circle was probably a dime. I don't know. But we're looking to create that center of the Pokeball. And then I also grabbed a ruler so I could just have straight lines, because I don't think I would have a straight line otherwise. And I made that line just a little bit under the inner circle top and a little bit under the bottoms of the inner circle. The bottom of the inner circle. And I'm using an edible pen for this. I recently saw someone using a pencil because there's not actual lead in it anymore. It's just graphite, and that felt so weird to me. I would just get an edible pencil. The other thing you can also use is just scratch it with your scribe. You just want to make sure you dust off your cookie. And that would be very simple to do for these Pokeballs. So I get started by outlining the red. And I'm outlining everything instead of just immediately filling it, except for this inner circle, this inner white circle. So I can just give it a little bit of time and create a solid edge before I come in and just put the rest of the icing in the middle of it. And so I'm doing the same with the white. And the big difference with this Pokeball, and something you're actually going to see with a lot of these, but particularly the Pokeball is different, is we're not going to add in the black until the white and the red have what's called in the cookie world crusted over. So they're not going to be as shiny as when they're freshly piped on with this icing. We're going to let them dry a little bit. They're not going to be completely dry. If you pressed your finger into it, it would definitely crunch and not look great. But the first Pokeball I did the black center first, that line and that outside circle. And I thought, I'll let it crust over, it'll be fine. And then I added the red, and I immediately saw it bloom with the black color going into the red. And it was so upsetting for me because I haven't had that happen in such a long time, where I've had color bleed like that. And it was so immediate. And so that's why we're letting things crust over, and we're doing the red and the white first, so that when the black is added, the white shouldn't immediately the white and the red shouldn't immediately pull in the moisture from the red, from the black, because they've already started drying. So there's a lot of moisture variation when you're decorating cookies. This is something I have learned a lot more about in the last couple of years, really. And that's why you get things like color bleed. That's why your icing transfers are going to dry a lot faster than your icing on a cookie would. That's why icing that has been oversaturated with color, it has too much moisture added to it, and so it's never going to dry appropriately. It's why you can have cookies never dry appropriately when they're drying in a humid place because there's too much moisture in the air. So you can see the white and the red, they're a little shiny, but they're not as shiny as when we first pipe them on. So we let them crust over. So what I would recommend, doing your Pokeballs first, decorating the red and the white, and then setting them aside and doing the base of the rest of your Pokemon. And that's going to allow you to get everything to crust over because we're not adding the faces onto the Pokemon until they crust over as well. The good news is, you might think, Cami, I do not have the time for this. This is taking way too much time. If you kind of decorate all the bases, you can then come back and add in all the details, and they will totally be ready for those details. So I'm coming through with the black and I'm outlining the initial shape. I find this is just easier to keep cleaner lines so I can still have a very obvious Pokeball right here if I'm outlining it. And you can see I'm doing a little bit of pressure piping where I'm having a very thick line with that outline, because it's just a tight space and I wouldn't be able to pipe such a small circle with the icing already in there, but I can kind of pressure pipe it in pretty neatly, and that's what I'm doing around the center as well. I'm just kind of pressure piping and I get a better looking line in my opinion. Specifically for this, 90% of the time if you're doing line work, I'm like, don't pressure pipe. You're not going to have a great looking line, but it kind of works here because we already have a bit of that outlined with the white and the red, and we added the outline to the straight parts of the side because that makes sense. And you can come in with your scribe and just make sure that everything's kind of evened out. You have icing in all the areas where you need icing. It's going exactly where it needs to go. And we have our Pokeball. Next up, we have Pikachu. And all of the rest of these cookies are going to have one, well, I say all, but there is one. There's Bulbasaur, which has two colors on their face. But the rest of these, they're just going to have a color base. And what I did is outlined. So you can see me doing this with Pikachu right now. I'm outlining the circle about 3, maybe 4 times. And to really make sure this cookie does not overflow, I'm gonna give it a few seconds, probably like 30 seconds to a minute, to dry that edge so that I can come in and add I can add an appropriate amount of icing into the center so I can have some really beautiful flat cookie bases. I was so excited. I actually took a picture of this because all of my cookie bases just looked so perfectly flat, and I feel like I haven't decorated a cookie that well where I was just like, the plain cookie base looks fantastic. We don't need anything else on this. I was very, very happy about it. And another thing I'm doing here, you can see I'm not completely against the edge until the very end, and that is helping again to preserve that edge of my cookie where I have that icing, so I'm not immediately pressing my icing against that edge. I'm letting it dry a little bit more, and then I'm going to slowly push some of that icing to the edge, and I do this kind of circle motion so that I'm pushing it to the edge and then immediately pulling it back in to help it avoid overflowing. It's so annoying to have an overflowing cookie. Thankfully, with these bases, it's not that big of a deal. I always do a little bit of a washing machine shake, and then there we go. It dried. You can see it has, again, crusted over, so it's not super, super wet icing it's lost its sheen because it's dried. And we're coming in with the face here. I actually went and put my black icing in a different piping bag and cut the hole again because I didn't like how big the faces turned out the first couple of times. So I would be a little bit more conservative with these faces. Pikachu looks like the easiest face because the eyes are dots and a half circle. But I found Pikachu to be the most challenging because it was so simple. I felt like it was so easy to kind of screw it up. But we're just going to come in here and outline a little bit of an eye and then kind of pressure pipe it to get it all the way circle around, and not too concerned about getting it perfect from the get-go and having a bit of an eyeliner effect here, because you can also come in with your scribe and kind of move the icing where you want it to be to get that full circle shape for the eye. And then the last color we're missing on Pikachu are those rosy red cheeks. And once you perfect that circle of the eye, always remember to wipe off your scribe so you don't get that color transferred anywhere else. And just pretty much pressure piping on those cute circle cheeks so that we can have a completed Pikachu. And again, if you have a kind of a wonky circle, come in with your scribe and correct it. You know, I can't push that icing back in to get rid of it, having it kind of blobbed out, but I can spread the icing out a little bit. Next up, we have Charmander with our orange base. So I'm going to grab my orange icing and go around the outline of the cookie, probably 3, maybe 4 times, so I can have a really, really solid edge on this cookie. It can help me have a really solid base. Some tips for having a very solid base that does not feel like too much icing is, again, outlining it so you have a good wall to keep your icing in. And then as you're adding icing, don't be afraid to add too much. This was something I struggled with quite a bit when I first got started. But if at the end of adding all of your icing onto your cookie, all the icing you feel like you need to cover your cookie, if you are seeing waves in that glossy surface from the lights reflecting onto it, you need more icing. And you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. My initial circle, you can see the light reflecting into it perfectly. So we have a very decent amount of icing. But if it wasn't perfect, if it was having weird waves in it, then I would need to add more icing so I can have a completely flat surface with this base color. And so go slow. You don't need to go all in one go. And again, I keep a little bit of extra space on the edge. I'm adding a little bit more icing around the edge of my inner base so that I don't end up with too little icing in the end. And then I always come through with my scribe and spread it out. And you can see the light reflecting in the waves, the kind of edges of the circle, the twirl that I piped on. And then you can also see the light reflecting a little strangely since I've used my scribe to move the icing around. You can also see it kind of flattening out as we go. The light's making like a half moon on the cookie, which is telling me that the cookie is relatively flat, that icing's relatively flat. And this is another reason to kind of shake your cookie a little bit because it helps even out where all of that icing is going to go. Once that cookie has crusted over, we can come in and add the facial features. So you really want to make sure that your cookie has fully crusted and dried. This was a major mistake I made because I had never done transfers like this before. Every previous time I've done transfers, let me just add this in. After you add the eyes onto the face, you then want to go in and add the rest of the facial features, which you can see me piping on here. But I just want to talk a little bit about why you don't want to add the transfers on before your cookie has dried. Now, it doesn't have to be fully dried. It doesn't mean that you can poke your cookie and your finger's not going to go through it. It just means it has fully crusted over. And what you see on this cookie is I put the eyes and I pressed them down a little bit. And you can see it kind of crushed around the eyes a little bit. We don't want that. These were too fresh of a cookie. And because of that, the extra black that I added into that eye, when I added into the black food coloring, leached into the eyes, and it didn't leach into the eyes. It leached into my cookie in the end, and you can kind of see it on one to the right. I really didn't want to show it very well. But you want your cookie to be fully dried. I'm going to keep talking about this while we move on to Squirtle, who is blue. And honestly, Squirtle is the blue version of Charmander. I don't know much about Pokemon, if I'm being completely honest. But after this, you will look at Squirtle and you will look at Charmander and you will just be like, you two are essentially the same looking thing. I will not say same thing. But okay, the eye transfers. Previously, every time I've used a transfer, I have always added icing onto the back of the dried transfer and then placed it onto my dried cookie. And I thought, why are we doing that? I can have my transfer lay so much flatter if I just add it to a semi-dried cookie and maybe press down a little bit. And now I learned my lesson, because particularly with the black, maybe this wouldn't have happened with a different color, but I oversaturated my black. Not too much, just a little bit. There was a little too much color in that black icing. And then on top of it, we have that moisture connection, like I talked about with the Pokeball, and I talked about while we were decorating the eye transfers, and why they dry faster, because they're not having to fight the moisture release of the cookie. So adding on the black eyes to a not fully dried cookie, not a crusted over cookie, and also pressing them into the cookie, one, it made the slightly crusted over base crack, and it just didn't look as good. Now, are we caring about those details so much? No, but if we're trying to do our best with this hobby, we should try and do our best. And two, my Charmanders, they all had color bleed from the eyes. The next day, they all looked like they had black eyes, and I knew my mistake. I should have waited till they were a little bit drier. I don't have this almost at all with any of the Bulbasaurs, and I didn't have it as much with the Squirtle either. Pretty much just the Charmanders. And so if I had waited till they were a little bit drier and I just added some icing onto the back of those eyes and placed them on the cookie, it would have been fine. They all would have looked great. I wouldn't have had any of that color bleed. So we're going back to bases here. We're making the Squirtle. I outlined it about 3 or 4 times. I let it dry a teensy bit, about a minute, maybe 2 minutes, and then I came in and filled in the base. We had a very lovely flat base. I will say, adding the eye transfers, I've seen a lot of cookiers use tweezers, and I was like, I don't think I need that, because in the past I haven't, and I wish I had tweezers. I did not have good tweezers for this. I really feel like having those little kind of L tweezers would be helpful. You will see the faces in the cookie decorating guide, which you can get in the link down below, absolutely for free, so you can know what kind of design you need to be putting on. This is one cookie where being able to turn it was really helpful for me, because doing these mouths, I knew I could do them one at a time, not like a full mouth shape, because this is kind of like a, I can't think of what it's called, like at a bracket. That's the right word. I'm literally looking at it on my keyboard. This is a bracket shape, and I knew I could do it both from the center. So I might also recommend just practicing making that bracket shape on a piece of parchment paper or something to the side, and then coming and doing it on the face, because Charmander, Squirtle, and Bulbasaur each have this kind of bracket mouth. And if you find all of my Pokemon, I feel like look a little angry and not quite as cute. So I hope yours turn out a little bit better. It's just the minor changes in how you pipe their nose on, or how you pipe their mouth, or how you even pipe their eyebrows can make a world of difference. I felt like all of their eyes looked good in the end, but the little teeny tiny details are things that I would love to improve on in the future. So we're getting started. Bulbasaurs are one that's slightly different, because there's 2 colors that go into Bulbasaur, and I will say it's a little hard to figure out where you should put the dark green. But you always get started, like all the other cookies we've done, by putting on just your flat base color. So this is our lighter green, not the dark green that we have a little bit of, but the lighter green. And I'm just going in a swirl pattern from close to the outside edge all the way to the center. You do not have to fill in your cookie this way. This is just what I'm doing. There is no right or wrong way to fill in your cookie except for maybe not outlining it first. If you didn't outline it first and then you just tried to decorate it, I might cringe a little, but it might work. Please show me if you can decorate cookies that way. And then I add a little bit of an extra edge so I can make sure I have enough icing for this base. And then I'm going to come in with my scribe and do a kind of twirl motion, pushing my icing to the edge and then back to the center. And this will help my icing not to overflow on my cookie and to help even out all of my icing as well. And this is another place where I like having my little turntable. I didn't have a turntable for, 2 years of decorating cookies as a hobby, and then I got one. And now I feel like I can't decorate without one. It's pretty silly. So now we're coming in with our dark, and we need it to be like on 1/3. And there is a specific shape that is on Bulbasaur's forehead, but it doesn't need to be like absolutely perfect. So it's kind of like an oval with a straight bottom, and then a funky squarish rectangle shape. I could not describe these shapes any better. I really don't know my shapes, if we're being honest. This is also a great example. You can see just how flat that base is, and then there's kind of a triangle shape below it. And we want that to be a little bit above and between our eyes. And so you just kind of want to think about where your eyes are going to go. This really only looked good on one of my Bulbasaurs, and in the end, it's a cookie, so it's okay. I'm showing you the one that I kind of got the spacing right on. And then I push them in. You can see it crusts over a little bit, and I wish I hadn't, but that's okay. And then we're going to come in with our details. I always did the eyebrows next, and then I'd be done with my eyes. And the lines just kind of following our eye shape. And then I'd come in with the mouth, where I did half of the kind of bracket mouth that goes up and then down and then curls up a little bit on the end. And I did a fairly good job of keeping them a similar shape on both sides. It's not perfect, but again, we're making cookies. It doesn't have to be perfect. And you just want to let the icing fully fall out of your piping bag. And then we're going to come in with the nose, which is 2 little lines. And there we will have our Bulbasaur. And here are all the variations that you can make together. And hopefully you will give it a try. I cannot wait to see what you create.